Multiplayer video games are notoriously hard to preserve. From 2000 all the way through to the current generation, there's a pretty wide gamut of games that can't be experienced, either due to being unavailable on modern platforms and storefronts, or simply lacking people to play with. Many are quick to condemn games like Apex Legends to the grave as soon as the charts trend downwards, but I suspect those same people have never felt the pain of being nostalgic for a game with a peak population in the single digits. As games get older, player counts inevitably fall, and eventually all that remain are the curious and the dedicated. The latter inevitably band together, forging communities from their shared love for the game and giving the former a reason to stick around. But this poses an important question. If you change every element put into place by the developer, the graphics, the mechanics, the rules, and the presentation, is the core experience still there? How do different communities keep their game alive and feeling fresh, and how much of the game's original spirit remains? Modern multiplayer shooters don't tend to support modding, often because new content can instead be monetized. It's easy to forget that once upon a time, not only was modding commonplace, it was facilitated and encouraged by developers themselves. Quake, Unreal, and Half-Life lent their engines to all manner of offshoots, ranging from simple reskins to total conversions and even full retail products. Valve has been described as lawful good in reference to their treatment of the modding community, as they've famously hired many modders and independent developers over the years, starting with the Quake modders behind Team Fortress in 1996. Their attitude hasn't changed much since. Projects as small as server plugins and gun skins are encouraged, just the same as totally new, for-profit games created within Valve IPs. Mods are a pillar of Valve game communities, and that much is obvious whether you boot up a game from 8 years ago, or twice that. It's ironic that the first game that comes to mind when discussing how mods have eroded vanilla experiences is CounterStrike, because the game itself was born as a mod for Half-Life, and Valve saw its potential. What followed was a title that rightfully claimed to be the #1 action game in the world for nearly a decade, and even after being dethroned, it clung on to relevance for a long time still. Despite multiple sequels and new games taking direct inspiration from Counter-Strike, fans adhered to the original retail version until well into the 2010s. This classic version, most commonly referred to as Counter-Strike 1.6, was the most popular game in the series' pro scene until well into the life of Global Offensive, and even today still manages average player counts in the 5 digits, not even accounting for the game's rampant piracy. But this isn't to say that 1.6 is blooming with life. 10,000 players in a game that's old enough to drink is impressive, but it's still a fraction of the numbers Global Offensive pulls today. And those numbers are not reflected in the game's server browser. Most servers sit empty, and more still are filled with unlabeled bots that trick newbies into joining unpopulated lobbies. The servers that do have real people playing are most commonly deathmatch mods. Other popular mods include Gun Game, Op Arena, and Zombie modes. Even a decade ago, it was difficult to find a server playing by vanilla rules. I have distinct memories of wandering into Warcraft mod servers as a kid and being extremely confused. After experiencing Global Offensive, a game with official matchmaking that provides a consistent, vanilla experience, those who find themselves curious about the series' origins might find spending valuable free time sifting through a limited selection of community servers to be a tough ask, especially when doing so doesn't always pay off. The best server I encountered, and one that I've returned to several times since, is a small but active community that plays only one level: Assault, a hostage rescue map that has appeared in every Counter-Strike game since, but in different forms. I've always loved Assault, but it doesn't get much play in Global Offensive, especially since being pulled from the competitive map pool a few years back. Assault is notoriously unbalanced in favor of the terrorist team, especially in 1.6, but this server has done a few things to mitigate that. For one, there's a strict rule about the vents. If a terrorist player touches the ladder, they are obligated to go all the way to the roof and push. This is to stop overly passive terrorists from chilling in the vent, which also has an automated kill trigger for any player that spends too long in it. A similar trigger exists for the hostage area, and the highest roof in CT spawn. The good guys also have a special rule. They have to be inside the building by the 30-second mark in each round. These rules are all specific to the way Assault is played, and they serve a purpose: to keep players moving. Combatants can't hide and wait each other out. Terrorists are forced to choose between holding a more vulnerable angle or pushing outside themselves, while CTs are forced to make a plan and execute it immediately rather than waiting for the enemy to get impatient. While these rules do help level the playing field, CTs are ultimately still forced into one of 3 choke points. But there are 5 modifications to the game's core mechanics that change the way the map is played. First, bullet penetration is entirely turned off. Wallbanging is a core mechanic of 1.6, but on Assault, it heavily favors the terrorists, who will often hear or see enemies before they have a chance to react, so it's been turned off. But there is still incentive to be stealthy and mobile, because the second modification is to grenades. While bullets no longer go through walls, grenades now completely ignore them, meaning cover doesn't make you invincible. Third, a new type of grenade has been added that freezes the target in place. They can still aim and fire, but they can't flee. Fourth, if only 2 players remain, they can agree to a 1v1 knife fight to settle the round. The final and most dramatic change is the addition of parachutes. Parachutes allow for dynamic play and last-second decision-making. Think the T's are gonna rush garage, go up on the overpass and parachute down when it's clear. You went roof, but your teammates gotta pick an alley? Parachute down to join them. The most interesting part of this server is that despite deviating from the vanilla formula in at least 8 ways, it still feels like CounterStrike. Encouraging movement doesn't stop rounds from coming down to nail-biting 1v1s or lessen the impact of a clutch play. All of these elements reward movement and punish camping, but without destroying the tactical gameplay formula that CounterStrike is known for. There are other mods in the server that don't serve this purpose, namely character models, hats, and sound effects. Anyone who's played a multiplayer Valve game before is probably familiar with these staples, and given how ubiquitous cosmetics have always been in their games, I don't think they qualify as deviations from developer intentions. But it is interesting that almost nobody plays 1.6 in its pure vanilla form anymore. This is a game that the most hardcore of the community clung to for over a decade, yet today, you'd be hard-pressed to find a server that doesn't change at least something about it. Maybe it's desire for variation, or just the community discovering how to improve an old design. But regardless of the reason, the people who played here, who describe themselves as CS 1.6 enthusiasts, clearly find the experience compelling enough to spend thousands of hours in it. Playing 1.6 in its vanilla form is more or less impossible for the average person, but you can get close, and there is a reason so many people play the custom game modes too. While enjoying 1.6 today does require patience and experimentation, the reward is worthwhile. As previously stated, Global Offensive has largely replaced 1.6, and its official matchmaking is still extremely popular. But there are two red-headed stepchildren between the franchise's success stories. Both are in a similar state to 1.6, with dwindling multiplayer populations that mostly play modified maps and modes. 1.6 received a direct sequel called Condition Zero in early 2004, though calling it a sequel might be giving it a bit too much credit. Condition Zero was more or less a graphics update and level pack for 1.6, utilizing many of the assets created for the Xbox version of Counter-Strike that released the year prior. I've always had a soft spot for Condition Zero, but its proximity to the launch of Counter-Strike's Source only exacerbate Condition Zero's aging engines and graphics. It is by far the least popular game in the series, averaging only 400 concurrent players in 2020. Ironically though, Condition Zero offers one of the purest vanilla Counter-Strike experiences you can have, albeit in single-player form. The game was structured around multiplayer scenarios with bots, in lieu of the canned story mode that would later be released as Condition Zero Deleted Scenes. But this is a single-player mode, we're here for multiplayer. And surprisingly, finding a decent game of Condition Zero is pretty easy. Despite having a fraction of 1.6's players, more servers offer vanilla-ish experiences than in the original game. This might be a result of the less popular game having fewer modifications for server owners to choose from. But whatever the reason, Condition Zero seems to have a small, dedicated community of fans keeping it going. While I encounter many languages I don't speak during my time with these games, I do know enough to suss out that I was insulted in at least 4 of them.
Well, the sensitivity's weird.
It's differently Brazilian Portuguese, I can't understand the thing you're saying. I do know this new guy is laughing at me. Because I put the silencer on my M4 and I immediately died and he said lol karma.
Even with the language barrier, friendly players were the norm. Counter-Strike's Source gets significantly more play than Condition Zero, but it's still only a third of the numbers pulled by 1.6. CSS has always been a bit of a black sheep. It's never had a serious competitive scene, and servers today are far more likely to feature innovative new game modes than anything Valve designed. This does make sense, when considering that CSS was more of an HD remaster of 1.6 than a proper sequel. Very little was added, and physics were significantly changed during the move to the Source engine. What resulted was a game that alienated competitive players and didn't offer anything new justified leaving behind years of community innovation in 1.6. The Source offers little in the way of unique multiplayer experiences, and has fewer vanilla servers in the game with 1/10 the active player base. Ignoring cosmetics, there are two main kinds of Counter-Strike mod. Mods that attempt to fix perceived flaws in the game's design, and mods that use Counter-Strike as a basis for their own unique experiences. And the fact that they still have such dedicated fans after all these years speaks to the quality of both the games themselves, and the tools Valve gave the community to make them their own. Counter-Strike isn't just a game, it's a platform upon which ideas can be explored. But when those ideas modify the rules, mechanics, and flow of gameplay, is it still the game the developers intended? I think so, and not just because mods were officially supported. All of these mods are ideas designed to take advantage of Counter-Strike's core mechanics and properties in some way. B-Hop and Death Run use the game's unique movement system to provide a challenging experience akin to platforming games. Scouts and Knives and Deathmatch servers reward the mechanical skill that makes Counter-Strike such a hard game to master. Even rule tweaks, like those found in the Assault server, serve to highlight Counter-Strike's strengths that have kept the community hooked for over 20 years. These concepts can be, and often have been, translated to other games, but the fact that there are still communities dedicated to Counter-Strike's older entries is a testament to how special these games really were, and still are. But unfortunately, not every corporation is willing to grant the community the same level of autonomy. When Infinity Ward released the original Call of Duty in 2003, the games industry was in a very different place. Halo had been out for a couple of years at this point, but console shooters still hadn't quite found their footing, and Call of Duty was a PC experience first and foremost. Save for the third game, which was console exclusive, the franchise was best played on PC for its first 5 entries. Even when the series found mainstream success on consoles with 2007's Modern Warfare, the PC version still supported mods, console commands, and user-run dedicated servers. But that would all disappear 2 years later, when Infinity Ward launched what would arguably be the most important game in their history. Dedicated servers were replaced with locked-down peer-to-peer matchmaking. The developer console was locked away outside of the player's reach, meaning that advanced graphical settings and features as basic as a field of view adjustments were now inaccessible without third-party tools which were liable to earn you a permanent ban. Mod support was also dropped, but the modifications themselves didn't go away. External tools were still widely available. But unlike previous entries where mods were used to create custom maps, modes, and even entirely new games, Modern Warfare 2's PC mods seem much like the console counterparts. Mod menus were used to hijack multiplayer lobbies and give one player complete control. This could be invincibility or aimbot, or even the ability to modify people's stats and rank. When removing official mod support, Infinity Ward completely failed to implement security features to prevent unsanctioned tampering, a clear result of developing for the closed ecosystem of consoles. This would have been less of an issue if the game used dedicated servers with player admins, but everything was peer-to-peer. Compare this to Battlefield Bad Company 2, a game released 4 months later that featured a proper server browser and no matchmaking. I can still hop in and play most of that game's content whenever I want. Thankfully, the next Call of Duty game in the series was developed with some modicum of common sense, and the PC version supported everything the old games did. Black Ops' PC port has aged much better than Modern Warfare 2's, but there are still issues. Much like Condition Zero, the game has only 300 concurrent players from around the globe, 100 less than Modern Warfare 2. And while the server browser makes finding a decent match easier than the earlier game's matchmaking, the low population means that players aren't exactly spoiled for choice. Most of these servers are 24/7 Nuketown, sniper trickshotting, servers with bizarrely strict rules, or some combination of the three. For example, one 24/7 Nuketown server I played completely banned wallbanging. If you don't see your target, you aren't allowed to shoot at them. As with CounterStrike, bullet penetration is a massively important mechanic in Call of Duty, especially at higher levels of play. When an entire community only ever plays one map and mode, one would expect that they'd reach that high level of play, and like the 1.6 communities previously discussed, attempt to raise the skill ceiling and find additional depth in their self-imposed sandbox. Knowing where enemies are likely to camp, flank, or spawn is a crucial part of Call of Duty game sense, and wallbanging is a tactic that directly rewards such skill. Don't get me wrong, disallowing players to abuse a game mechanic or item is perfectly fine in most cases, but banning a core mechanic while allowing rocket launchers, claymores, and the FAMAS is like a hardcore server in Modern Warfare 3 allowing akimbo FMGs but banning sprinting. Wait, no, that wasn't a suggestion. Ladies and gentlethims, may I introduce to you crouch-only servers, otherwise known as I want to be tactical, but my PC can't run Arma. These servers have existed at least since Call of Duty 4, if not earlier, but in Modern Warfare 3, they are often the literal only way to play the game. MW3 is so dead that at any given time, there are more people playing its single-player campaign than its multiplayer. Steam says that 160 people are playing right now, but best I can tell, it's more like 16. None of the playlists put me in a game, and the only server with players doesn't let you walk, run, or jump. You have to crouch walk everywhere. Out of genuine curiosity, I asked people in these servers why they like this game mode enough to play it for nearly 10 years. Most answered that it's, and I quote, more tactical. But I'm fairly sure that if a grenade landed next to a real soldier's feet, he'd tactically run the fuck away from it. An answer that made slightly more sense is that after playing the game for hundreds of hours over many years, the vanilla game's balance has become intolerable, and the slower playstyle found in these servers is more palatable to veterans. Which I guess I sort of get, but when you consider the mechanics that made the Modern Warfare games a success, that is, fast-paced movement and gunplay, forcing players to crouch walk everywhere seems to completely abandon everything the game did right. If tactical is what these players are looking for, I'm not sure why they don't go play any number of actual tactical shooters on the market. But clearly, there's something enjoyable about this game mode, since the entirety of the remaining player base flocks to it. Half the time I get on W3, these servers are the only ones with people playing on them, so I guess I'll join in. Oh. They have DLC maps enabled, and I don't have the right map pack, so I can't play with them. Map packs are still full price, and sales are rare, so out of all the Call of Duty games I've talked about in this video, Black Ops 2 is the one I enjoy the most. It's still a great time, provided you can find a game. We're once again back to matchmaking instead of a server browser, so you're at the mercy of an algorithm. Wonder what that's like. Literally every single person playing Black Ops 2 online right now is in the core Team Deathmatch playlist, so you have basically zero chance of playing anything else. Finding a match does take a few minutes, but lobbies don't disband after each game. So once you're in, you're set. And man, Black Ops 2 is still so fun, even when limited to just TDM on stock maps. But unfortunately, that limitation lumps this game right in with Modern Warfare 2. Because server browsers don't exist, it's unlikely anyone will ever get to experience most of this content ever again. And small communities with very specific tastes mean that Black Ops and Modern Warfare 3 are more or less doomed to the same fate. These 4 games are taking on water and are at various stages of sinking. It's one thing for a community to lose interest and move on, but Call of Duty games, and those that follow their lead, are cases where the will to play is there, but the ability isn't. And with Activision still charging $40 or even $60 for most of these games, it's unlikely they'll ever experience organic revival. When planning this video, I specifically avoided writing about games that have been shut down or otherwise made playable again by third-party modifications. But the Call of Duty games are an exception, because all of them are still technically playable through official means. It's just not a great experience. Almost all of the issues plaguing these titles are a result of purposeful decisions made to make the PC version worse. I'm not just being edgy. Literally every feature removed from these games has been added back in by the community, from dedicated servers and FOV sliders, to leaning left and right in games that removed that functionality. I don't mean to undersell the hard work of modders that made these clients possible, but the fact that one person was able to re-implement all of these features, basically by himself, within a single year is a clear sign that it was indifference, not inability, that produced such a lazy port. Changing a field of view in Modern Warfare 2 uses the same console command as in the original, and by the same time in 2011, AlterWNet was a fully functional product with its own anti-cheat, hardware ban system, server browser, and modding scene. This isn't secondhand information. I was there. The first YouTube video I ever made was an AlterW commentary that I produced at the age of 12. I lost so many hours to hardcore TDM on Subbase that summer, but unfortunately it wasn't meant to last. In May of 2012, Activision issued a cease and desist order demanding that AlterW be discontinued. A few different offshoots followed, before settling on what we have now, IW4X. And clients have since followed for Modern Warfare 3 and the first 2 Black Ops games. The Call of Duty community has done for free what Activision wouldn't even do for money. Provide these games with the PC port they deserve from the get-go. But unlike CounterStrike's community, which modified the game out of desire for fresh content and better balance, Call of Duty's modders reverse engineered these games not just to make the vanilla experience better, but to make sure it even continues to exist. You can play Nuketown in Modern Warfare 2 and Rust in Modern Warfare 3, but if all you want to do is finally play something besides crouch-only TDM on Dome, you have that too. Knowing the turmoil between Activision and their studios during this time, I severely doubt the innovators that turned this franchise into a household name wanted to turn their back on the audience they spent so long catering to. Instead, I think it's more likely that the team faced an unfortunate ultimatum. Save time and money by designing the game's infrastructure once for all 3 platforms, or sacrifice your larger creative vision over a version that a fraction of your audience will ever play. When I said that these ports are bad due to indifference, I meant on the part of Activision, not Infinity Ward and Treyarch. I'm not knocking Call of Duty. It's a guilty pleasure game that I buy almost every year, and I actually really enjoyed games most considered to be series low points. But enjoyment doesn't preclude criticism. And further, it doesn't matter how good a game is if it can't be played. That's the thing, these 2 games have evolved in very different ways, but they have something in common. Playing them still feels like time travel. Some of the regulars could be accused of LARPing 2006. And hell, if these modifications have kept people playing for 10 or even 20 years, they're clearly doing something right. These are just 2 stories of many. While these experiences may not reflect the developer's original intent, the communities it fostered wouldn't be the same without the blood, sweat, and tears along the way. These aren't just replacements, rules, or adjustments. They are key parts of the game's community, history, and legacy.